What's going on, guys? I'm CFB Kings, and welcome back to another episode of the CFBKings Show. Really appreciate you tuning in today. We've got another loaded week of college football coming up as we head into the second week of the 2024 season. Just a quick reminder before we get into today's episode, if you like what you hear, make sure to subscribe if you're watching on YouTube or follow if you're listening on Spotify, as well as make sure to follow at CFB Kings on Twitter and Instagram for all things college football. I love doing the show to be able to go really in depth on certain topics each week, but for instant reaction, updates, news, highlights, and more, make sure you're following on those socials. All right, week 2, a couple major ranked matchups, and then tons of off-the-radar games that will be awesome as well. Most of those games are getting overshadowed by number 3 Texas going on the road to number 10 Michigan, a battle between two teams in last year's college football playoff, including the reigning national champions. Texas is just about a touchdown favorite, right around 7.5 or 8, depending on where you look. Over-under is 42.5, implied score of 25-18 Texas. Probably something more practical like 24-17. Last week, Texas smoked Colorado State 52-0, and probably could have found their way into the end zone a few more times if they chose to. But Michigan, however, wasn't quite as impressive. If you missed it last week, the Wolverines struggled with Fresno State, so much so that they were in a 6-point game with just about a few minutes left in the fourth quarter. So they ended up scoring a touchdown to pull away and then had an 88-yard pick six to really seal the deal and separate on the scoreboard to win 30-10. So they had just 25 more total yards than the Bulldogs, though, and the same amount of first downs, and the score wasn't really super indicative of how the game was played. One of the biggest questions this week is Michigan's quarterback situation. Texas is set for years with Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning, but the Wolverines are replacing J.J. McCarthy, and last week Davis Warren got the start. He went just 15 of 25 for 118 yards, 1 touchdown, and an interception. So not great, especially with the increase in talent that they're about to face. They also have Alex Orji, who came in and threw 1 completion for a touchdown, but I think it was for like 2 or 3 yards. So at least for now, it appears to be Warren's job, but a major question heading into week 2. Something else that was interesting last week is that Donovan Edwards didn't lead Michigan in rushing, and not only did he not lead them, he wasn't even second on the team in rushing yards. Against Fresno State, Edwards had 11 carries for 27 yards, just about 2.5 yards per carry. Kalel Mullings had 15 carries for 92 yards, and then Orji had 5 carries for 32 yards. So something to watch there if Edwards can bounce back this week and match those CFB 25 cover athlete expectations that he came into the season with. You can never make too many conclusions from week 1 college football. You've got to tread lightly. You can't really believe everything that you see scoreboard-wise. Those box scores can also be deceiving in certain ways. But when I saw this spread, though, to be honest, I kind of had to double-check. It is in the big house. They're the defending champions, but with all the talent that they lost off last year's team, losing head coach Jim Harbaugh, and just with how they looked last week. And don't get me wrong, Fresno State's not a chump by any means. They beat Purdue last year, and they beat Arizona State by 30 last year. So they've definitely got a solid program and a good team. They also gave Oregon a game in Autzen a few years ago as well. So Texas is a little bit different, though, for Michigan. I can definitely see it being a solid game for a while, and if that crowd stays in it, if they're able to kind of confuse Texas, maybe cause a couple miscues for them, I can see, the Wolverines get a couple turnovers, maybe they can pull it off. However, I'm very much leaning toward the likelihood that Texas not only wins, but that Texas also covers. I think it could be a situation where something like it being a 3 or 4 point game late, and they tack on a touchdown to pull away. Number 14 Tennessee travels to Charlotte for a neutral site matchup with number 24 NC State. The Vols are an 8.5 point favorite. Over-under is 61.5, giving us an implied score of about 35-27 Tennessee. So these two teams had polar opposite week 1s. Tennessee was flying high. Everything looked good in Knoxville. Nico Iamaleava at quarterback was phenomenal. He threw for over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns and only played in the first half, while NC State had a little bit of a game on their hands with Western Carolina. Grayson McCall and the Wolfpack turned it on late and got some separation, but it was a little sketchy there for a bit last week. The biggest thing I'm looking forward to watching in this game is Tennessee's secondary against NC State's wide receivers. The Wolfpack has 2 dogs in Casey Concepcion and Ohio State transfer Noah Rogers. UConn transfer Justin Jolly at tight end is very good as well. And it took McCall a while last week to get going, but by the end of that game, he started to look more how we were accustomed to seeing him play at Coastal Carolina. So that'll be a fun matchup to watch, just over a touchdown spread. And after how good Tennessee looked last week and how the opposite of good NC State looked at points, very similar to Texas and Michigan, I think most people probably thought that this spread might be a little bit wider, but I think NC State definitely has the pieces to pull this off. I think the Wolfpack will cover, but I'll take the Vols to win it outright. Colorado travels to Nebraska this week, an old Big 8 showdown between the Buffaloes and the Huskers. This was a massive game last year in terms of giving us all the Colorado hype, all the Dion hype. Probably played a role in bringing enough eyes to Boulder to get Travis Hunter on that College Football 25 cover. This was really a big game early last year and is shaping up to be pretty significant again. So, of course, neither team ended up doing anything last season after that game, but who knows, maybe it'll be different this year. But I made a season preview for Nebraska in the summer, and they've got some serious potential for this 2024 season. The game's at 7:30 p.m. Eastern on NBC. The Huskers get the home game. They're 7.5-point favorites, over-under of 58.5, giving us an implied score of 33-26 Nebraska. The Huskers have Dylan Raiola now at quarterback. He was a 5-star that they flipped from Georgia. In their season opener, he was 19 of 27. That's a 70.4% completion percentage for 238 yards and 2 touchdowns against UTEP. He's got a solid receiving core to work with, much improved from last year. A couple names to know are Jamal Banks, a transfer from Wake Forest, Isaiah Nayer, who transferred from Texas, and then Jalen Lloyd and Malachi Coleman as well. Nebraska held UTEP to just 56 yards rushing, and the Huskers won that game 40-7. Colorado, though, had a nail-biter with FCS North Dakota State. They pulled off a 31-26 victory over the Bison. And I know it's popular to hate on Colorado and make fun of that game, but North Dakota State really is a talented team. They have an incredible program. They're a dynasty in the FCS, and it did take a few things going Colorado's way for them to win, but that's definitely not your average FCS opponent. So, on the other hand, Colorado on Friday night looked exactly like they did in 2023. I mean, almost the exact same team. Shadur Sanders and Travis Hunter were elite, but outside of them, the offensive line struggled, the defense struggled. The Bison dominated time of possession. They had more first downs. They put up 449 total yards, just 55 less than Colorado's 504. Sanders was on the ground a lot. Colorado only had 59 yards rushing. It was like a picture-perfect copy of 2023 Colorado. Nebraska, however, like I mentioned with Raiola, is significantly improved. And that was a game last year between the Huskers and the Buffaloes that was in Boulder. It was one of Colorado's most hyped up home environments of the season. I think like Big Noon kickoff was there or something. Nebraska played horribly, and I think they had like 5 turnovers, and it was still a close game deep into the third quarter. So I think that Matt Rule has the Huskers on a steep upward trajectory. I cannot say the same about Colorado from what I've seen so far. And I think Nebraska will win this game on Saturday night, and I believe they'll cover as well. Number 23, Georgia Tech, travels up to the JMA Dome, formerly the Carrier Dome, RIP, to take on Syracuse. The Yellow Jackets are ranked for the first time since 2015. Brent Key and the Haynes duo, Haynes King and Jamal Haynes, really have things going on right now. Last week, they beat Georgia State 35-12. Syracuse beat Ohio 38-22. Georgia Tech is a 3-point favorite, over under 61.5, giving us an implied score of 32-29 Yellow Jackets. Syracuse is another team that I previewed during the offseason, who I believe in the potential of greatly for this year. If you don't remember from over the offseason, Syracuse has a new head coach. They fired Dino Babers and hired former Georgia defensive backs coach Fran Brown. They got transfer quarterback Kyle McCord from Ohio State. He threw for 354 yards and 4 touchdowns against Ohio on Saturday. So I saw this stat right after the game, but in his entire tenure at Ohio State, he never once threw for over 350 yards and 4 touchdowns in a single game. So 1 week at Syracuse, 1 Saturday with the Orange, and he's already putting up better numbers than he did in Columbus. They've got an elite tight end in Oronde Gadsden. He's one of the main reasons that McCord was able to put up the numbers that he did. Gadsden had 7 receptions for 108 yards and a touchdown. Then they've got one of the top linebackers in the country in Marlo Wax, who I believe is questionable, and in all likelihood he probably won't play against Georgia Tech this week, which is a big blow. But they also have Texas A&M transfer edge Fadil Diggs, who was big for them on Saturday. The biggest key in determining who will win this game is Jamal Haynes in the Georgia Tech rushing attack against Syracuse's defensive front. On Saturday, the Orange allowed Ohio running back Anthony Tyus to run for 203 yards and 2 touchdowns. And if they have that type of performance again defensively, Jamal Haynes and Haynes King could have a massive day on the ground. And going back to week 0, the way that Georgia Tech was able to beat Florida State was with long, sustained drives where they were able to run the ball over and over and over and control the pace of the game. This is a matchup that I really have no lean on. I've been high on Syracuse since back in May, but Georgia Tech has been really impressive so far this season. I do believe that Marlowe Wax, that linebacker for Syracuse, who I believe is not only one of the best in the ACC, but one of the best in the country, up there with some of the other stars like Clemson's Barrett Carter and LSU's Harold Perkins. He is that type of guy for this Syracuse team. I do believe he's going to be out for this week, and I think that will give Georgia Tech a little bit of an edge, a pretty significant edge actually. So I'll go ahead and take the Yellow Jackets to pull off the win. Arkansas travels to Stillwater to face number 16 Oklahoma State on Saturday. If you didn't watch the Hogs last week, it was something to behold. They beat FCS Arkansas Pine Bluff 70-0. 70-0. They racked up 678 total yards of offense, and it was just a bloodbath from start to finish. They lost quarterback KJ Jefferson from last year, who transferred to UCF, but Taylon Green was remarkable. He went 16 of 23 for 229 yards and 2 touchdowns, and then also had 8 carries for 88 yards and 2 touchdowns as well. 317 total yards, 4 total touchdowns, and he didn't even play all of the game. Arkansas actually had 3 different quarterbacks get in. The competition is what it is, but not every team, Oregon, played like this in their season opener against an FCS opponent. Oklahoma State played 2-time reigning FCS national champion South Dakota State. Ollie Gordon and the Cowboys won 44-20. The score was a little deceiving, though, in terms of how South Dakota State played. The Jackrabbits put up 388 total yards. They had just 6 less yards than Oklahoma State's 394. But South Dakota State had 4 turnovers on downs. They played very ambitiously on 4th down and gave the Cowboys the ball in favorable field position several times. Ollie Gordon was a workhorse. He had 28 carries for 126 yards and 3 touchdowns. Those 28 carries are more than he had in 9 different games last year, so they really relied on him down the stretch. Alan Bowman was solid at quarterback, 24 of 33, 245 yards, 2 touchdowns. For this week's game, Oklahoma State is a touchdown favorite. Total is 62.5. Implied score of right around 35-28 Cowboys. This is one of the matchups that I'm looking forward to the most this week. I think this will be a balanced, even game deep into the second half, but I do see Oklahoma State coming out on top. I'm taking the Cowboys to win, and I think they'll tack on a late touchdown to cover the spread. We've also got the Cy-Hawk between the Iowa State Cyclones and the number 21 Iowa Hawkeyes. Iowa is a 3.5-point favorite. Over-under is a whopping 35.5, which somehow still feels high, but that gives us an implied score of 20-16 Hawkeyes. In an interesting turn of events last week, Iowa actually scored and did so multiple times. They beat Illinois State 40-0. It did take a little bit of time for the offense to get going. It was just 6-0 at the half, which felt exactly as it has for the past several years with Iowa, but the 34-point second half was actually very impressive. Cade McNamara had 251 yards passing and 3 touchdowns. Iowa State beat FCS North Dakota 21-3. Both defenses were very stout. North Dakota absolutely dominated time of possession in that game. Of the 60 minutes on the clock, North Dakota had the ball for 38. Iowa State had it for 22. So if you look at it like that, Iowa State was actually scoring a point per minute. They really just didn't get the ball that many times. This is a game that I have absolutely no lean on whatsoever, but a rivalry that I always love watching. So it'll be fun to see how each team looks against a Power 4 opponent. Okay, a couple other games here. Texas Tech goes to Washington State, my Big 12 champion pick, Texas Tech, that is. They did not have their best game last week, to put it lightly. If you didn't watch Texas Tech and Abilene Christian on Saturday, good. Please don't watch the replay. Thank you. Texas Tech is 1-0, and that's all you need to know. But in all seriousness, though, it was week 1. They're working out a couple kinks, and I think the Red Raiders will be all right. Washington State beat Portland State 70-30. Their quarterback, John Mateer, completed 11 passes. 5 of them were touchdowns. He was extremely efficient, and he was very nearly a King of the Week in Week 1. Make sure to go watch the Week 1 recap if you haven't already, but at the end of each week, I do Kings of the Week and just highlight some of the best performances, and he was very strongly considered for one of those spots. But for Saturday in Pullman, the Cougars are a 2.5-point favorite, over-under 66.5. This might be the highest scoring game all week if the defenses played like they did last week. And implied score is 35-32 Washington State, but I think this can easily be in the 40s. Definitely make sure to dial into this one late on Saturday night. Should be an electric matchup. Boise State at number 7 Oregon and App State at number 25 Clemson are two of the biggest games for a group of 5 teams all season. These are just about their only chances to potentially get one of the college football playoff top 4 seed bye weeks. And what I mean by that is the new 12-team CFP bracket, the top 4 highest-ranked conference champions are seeded 1 to 4, and all 4 of those teams get a first-round bye week. But the 5th highest-ranked conference champion, who will likely be, and who everyone is expecting to be, the representative from the group of 5, can be placed anywhere from 5 to 12. But if Boise State were to beat Oregon and run the table, and Oregon were to rebound later in the year and win the Big Ten, would the committee put Oregon ahead of Boise State? Same thing for App State. If the Mountaineers were to beat Clemson in Death Valley and then go 13-0 and win the Sun Belt, while Clemson regroups and wins the ACC at 11-2, would App State be ahead of Clemson with that head-to-head win in their building? These are two of the only matchups where I can see the group of 5 team being the highest-ranked champion from the G5, as well as the other 2 teams being able to win their conference in Oregon in the Big Ten and Clemson in the ACC. So Clemson is a 17-point favorite, and Oregon is like an 18 or 19-point favorite. So not super likely, although Oregon was a 50-point favorite over Idaho, so who knows. But definitely something to watch there that could carry some serious implications in December. Okay, to wrap up here, I wanted to offer a few picks that caught my eye for Week 2's slate. I wanted to preface by saying that if you don't engage in any wagering, just keep it that way. If you do, be smart about it. Pretty simple. Set some rules. Stick to them. Be wise. Don't change your unit size. Don't believe what you see on social media and half of these commercials that they're running now and stuff. And just stay smart. All right, first we've got Pitt at Cincinnati. Cincinnati is a 1.5-point favorite. This is a noon Eastern kick on ESPN2 on Saturday. Straight up, I just don't think the right team is favored here. I've got Pitt money line. I loved what I saw out of Eli Holstein, the transfer quarterback from Alabama last week. He threw for 333 yards. That is the most by a Pitt quarterback in a season opener in over 20 years. Running back Desmond Reed had 14 carries for 145 yards and a touchdown, and they really just did whatever they wanted against Kent State. They beat them by 31. And now Kent State is the worst team in the FBS, according to the ESPN FPI, so there's only so much you can take away from Week 1. Cincinnati was in a 1-score game with FCS Towson in the third quarter. And like I said, there's only so much you can really conclude from Week 1 games against inferior opposition. So it doesn't really have as much to do with Week 1 results as it does with some analytical stuff, but that's just more for context. I have a very strong lean toward Pitt in this one. Next, we've got Clemson minus 16.5 over App State. Despite all of what I just said about the G5 CFP top 4 chances and all of that, that still may happen, but I don't think it's going to be App State if it does. I think a lot of people's perception of Clemson was a little skewed by them playing the number 1 team in the country. That was a really solid game for 3 quarters, but blew up on them late. I think Clemson's defense is going to be too much for App State. And Clemson's offense, I think it will look significantly better than it did against Georgia, but I also think it really doesn't have to be anything crazy to cover this spread. I just don't think App State's going to be able to score enough to stay within 17. Virginia at Wake Forest. This game is basically a pick'em. I think Wake Forest might be a 1-point favorite some places, depending on where you look. But yeah, same thing either way. 7 p.m. Eastern, ESPN2 on Saturday. I love Virginia in this game. The Cavaliers went 3-9 last year, but I'm being mostly serious when I say this. That was one of the best 3-9 teams I've ever seen. Every single time I watched them, I went away thinking, man, they could have won that game. And in a lot of cases, they probably should have. They lost to James Madison by 1. JMU won 11 games. They lost to NC State by 3. The Wolfpack finished ranked. They lost to Thomas Castellanos and BC by 3. They beat Drake Mays, North Carolina by 4. They lost to Miami by 3. They lost to ACC runner-up Louisville by 7. And what I think last year did in giving them close game after close game after close game was all that experience. I think this year they're going to start winning some of those. And Anthony Calandria at quarterback is a ton of fun to watch. He set multiple freshman records for them last year in completions, passing yards, and total offense. And then Tony Elliott, he's heading into his third year now as head coach. And I think the Hoos get it done. I'll leave it at 3 for now. A couple others that I was looking at were Jacksonville State plus 30 against Louisville, and Nebraska covering that minus 7.5 against Colorado, but undecided on those as of now. That's going to wrap up this episode of the show. Really appreciate you tuning in, especially if you made it this far. Make sure to subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, follow if you're on Spotify, and remember to follow at CFBKings on Twitter and Instagram. Thank you so much for watching. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and take care.